this gospel story came to my mind from my childhood. I was amazed at the reaction of Mary and Joseph when they found Jesus. After 3 days of being lost, they just seemed very calm. So one day when I was in school, and I was back in Mexico, school must have been done early, and I saved my money. I did not buy lunch so that I could go and play. It was before video games, one of these arcade machines, you know. So I went and played there for a while. I thought it was just a few minutes, but apparently it's a few hours. Because when I was going home, you're going home, you're kind of sad, you're broken, you lost, and you're out of money. And so there was a hill to go down to go to my home. And so I was starting to walk down the hill, and I see some of my family members coming up the hill. Then I like, oh, it must be late. And so after they checked on me and see how I was doing and see if I was safe, they were worried that something had happened to me. I did not report at home. But after that, they grabbed me by the ear, and then, you know, like you cranked up like the AC when it's cold. They did that on me so that I would learn obedience, not to do that again. Needless to say, I never went back. So anyway, that's just a story that came to my mind. Today, we're celebrating this beautiful feast of the Holy Family of Mary and Joseph. I think that very often this image of the Holy Family, this people of Mary and Joseph, tends to be like too idealized at times. We kind of like forget that they were real people with real problems. It's easy for us to think that when Jesus needed a diaper change, that the angels just ran in haste and changed the diapers for Mary. Or we tend to think that whenever Joseph had something to do at his workshop, that the angels were there just kind of working for him, and Joseph was just kicking back and relaxing. And that was not it at all, right? It's very easy for us to think that Mary and Joseph had so easy because they had the Son of God in their midst and they were just caring for Jesus. And that was not the case at all. These were real people with real problems. They were being oppressed. They were being rejected. They were being followed and persecuted for who they were. And so they needed to run from place to place, always facing dangers, always facing the cold at night and the heat in the day. And so, but even in the midst of those difficulties, they were able to work through them, to support one another, to be there for one another, rather than pointing fingers at who was responsible for losing Jesus in the trip. They were together, helping, supporting, and loving one another. Mary and Joseph had to learn how to build a community of persons within themselves, how to be there for one another, how to support, how to respect one another, how to show real love and vulnerability for one another. That's something that we just think that it was a given for them and for all the saints, that they just knew how to do it and went with it. And that's just not the case at all. Mary and Joseph, there was an age difference. Mary must have been 13, 14, and yet she needed to learn how to be mature, how to be loving, how to be caring, how to be real and vulnerable with God first, and then with Joseph, so that they together could build this community of love, this community of relationships, not just among Mary and Joseph and Jesus, but with God Himself. That in the midst of their troubles or difficulties, in the midst of the dangers that they had to face, God was in their midst. God was in their heart because they were open to it, because they turned to the Lord and they were asking God for help, for support, for guidance. And so God was always there for them. But they had to learn that. It was not that they were just a given, that they were just a good, solid family. The gospel today, towards the end of the gospel, said that Jesus, after they found Him in the temple, went with them, Mary and Joseph, and Jesus learned obedience from them. So Mary and Joseph had to create this community of love in which they could teach Jesus, in which they could form Jesus to be a good man, a man of ethics, a man of work, a man of solidarity, a man of love, of kindness, and of mercy. This obedience from Jesus' humanity, that he learned it at home, was a reflection of His divine obedience that He had to the Father in His heart. Like Jesus' ministry was an overflow of the inner communion relationship with the Father that he had. He was always in relationship with the Father in his heart. And he learned that at home with his parents. 30 years of Jesus' ministry were behind the scenes. Learning how to be obedient, how to be kind, how to be a hard worker, how to be there for his family, how to be loved by his family, and how to love his family back. 30 years. And then the 3 years that he spent in ministry were that overflow that came from his communion and relationship with God, the Father, and from Mary and Joseph. So you might be wondering, where am I going with all of this, right? Today, our families are walking away from the Lord. Our families in our world are walking away from the love of the Father, from His church. A lot of people see this church as a bunch of rules that we have to follow, a bunch of burdens that are placed upon you. And people kind of forget what the church is all about. That the church is meant to be the sacred heart of Jesus, where we are thrown into, so that in the fire of His love, we're purified, we're loved, we're set on fire, so that we can be loved, so that we can know our identity as sons and daughters of God. That we are just sons and daughters of God, loved by the Father, to the point that He sent His only begotten Son to be sacrificed for us. And that's all learned at home with the Holy Family. Nowadays we have a ton of people in our world, a ton of children running around into the world seeking that fulfillment, seeking that purpose, seeking that love that they could not find at home. Our families, for some reason, are not able to bestow like authentic love. Unfortunately, a lot of our children are getting out of their homes seeking that false fulfillment. That fulfillment that the world offers in drugs and violence and fake relationships. And unfortunately, it's because at home they were not able to experience that authentic love that comes from God. So I think that the Lord is calling us for us to turn to the Lord as individuals first. That we may truly know in our hearts that identity that we have as sons and daughters of God. That we know that we're loved by the Father. That we have that dignity. That nothing will satisfy us but God's love. And God's love that wants to burn within us. God's love that wants to purify us. God's love that wants to fulfill us. And then, as individuals, when we are able to turn to the Lord, then we turn to our spouses and our families. Then we can be real. Then we can be authentic. We can be vulnerable. We can share our hearts with them. We can be one with them. Because then we know that we're loved by God. And that we're only able to share the love with others to the extent that we let God's love fill our hearts. That was the secret of the Holy Family. Where they let themselves be loved by God, be set on fire by God, and then they could teach Jesus how to love and how to be loved. May we truly open ourselves to the Lord, that we may truly let ourselves be loved by God, be set on fire with His love, so that we can go out and share it with others. Today the Lord is coming to us in the Eucharist. The Lord wants to share His divine communion with us. The Lord wants to break open our hearts and dwell within us, so that we know our true identity as beloved sons and daughters of God, so that we can go out and love and serve others the way we're called to. Will we let the Lord break through the hardness of our heart and be loved, be cared, and be served by Him?